Welcome everyone to today's session of Hot Topics in Nutrition, Nutrition and Gut Health. You are what you eat, led by senior nutritionist Hillary Wright. This program is hosted by the Blum Resource Center. Over at the Blum, we are grateful to the nutrition team for this continued partnership. The recording of this session will be posted on our Blum YouTube playlist and our Blum Digital Resource Center. For those of you watching live, if you have any questions related to today's program, please feel free to utilize the chat so we can moderate a brief Q&A at the end. If you have any other questions or would like more information about resources and programs offered through the Blum, please visit our website at www.dana-farber.org/resource center, or you can email us at blum_center@dfci.harvard.edu. Thank you all for joining us. I will now pass the workshop over to Hillary.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hillary Wright. I'm a senior nutritionist at Dana-Farber. I've been here for 17 years. And we're really happy to be able to partner with Blum to do these kind of mini education sessions. So today I'm attempting to take a really complex, broad topic and break it down into just the basics of what might be helpful for people to know about the gut microbiome, because this is a really hot topic. It's something that people are reading a lot about online. And there's also in most instances, the hype is far exceeding where we are with the science. So I think to actually understand what we're talking about, we discuss gut health and the microbiome. I think it's helpful to provide a little background. So what exactly is the microbiome? So the microbiome basically refers to the microbial partners that live with us in our body. So we understand that besides our human cells, we coexist with trillions of microorganisms, collectively known as the microbiome. So most people are familiar with bacteria, gut bacteria, but this microbiome also includes viruses and fungi, and they're all healthy and necessary. We need these healthy microbes to exist, and they need us. So it's a symbiotic relationship. So in fact, our microbiome comprises about 1 to 3% of our entire body mass. So it's said that we actually have more microbial cells in and on our body than we actually have human cells. Most of them are bacteria, and most of them do live in the gut, but we have them every place in the body. So these gut microbes, they cohabitate with us, but they aren't part of our body. They kind of live along with us. Oops, sorry about that. So what influences the microbiome? So we don't fully understand the answer to that question, but what we do know is that much of what constitutes an individual's microbiome is acquired within the first 3 years of life and remains fairly stable unless other significant outside influences come into play. So they say that our individual microbiome is actually as unique to us as our fingerprint. So it's important to think about that next time when you go into a health food store or CVS and you're looking at probiotic supplements, trying to figure out if I have an issue I'm trying to treat, and I'd like to know which strains of microbes will fix my problem. It's really important to know that our knowledge to that on that point to this point is actually quite limited. So we do know that, so our kind of basic outline of our microbiome may be seeded in the first 3 years of life, which, by the way, is a really good reason to let little kids get dirty. This is one of the things I thought about a lot during the pandemic when kids were home more, that I was thinking, I hope parents are getting their kids out and still getting them dirty and exposing them to the environment, because it's this physical exposure to the environment that seeds our microbiome. So this community, it is dynamic to some degree, even though a lot of it is set early on, but it can be affected by diet quality, travel, antibiotic use. Those of you who, in my children's era, my kids were all born in the 90s, there was an awful lot of an awful lot of antibiotic use used in kids back in those days, which I've thought about a lot. Also, infections can affect the microbiome, but it's good to have a diverse microbiome because this is a sign of resiliency and is desirable. So we now understand that about 70% of our immunity comes from this microbiome environment. And so the more diverse and nurtured it is, the better it is for our health. If your microbiome becomes negatively affected, this is referred to as dysbiosis and is defined as a lack of microbiome diversity and can be related to increased development of chronic conditions like colorectal cancer, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease. So I think one way to think about this is these microbes, they produce their own environment, and many of the compounds that they produce operate as anti-inflammatory substances, antioxidants, help our body to detoxify itself. So, this is a really probably the number one reason, very good incentive to eat more dietary fiber, because that, we'll get to that more later, but that's how you really nurture a good, healthy microbiome. So when we start talking about this, often the subject of probiotic supplements comes up. And so we know these are everywhere. Anyone that's ever looked at the supplement counter or in the refrigerator section, which is where a lot of these probiotics often are, they are very vast and different in terms of their concentration, how many strains they have, and all of that. So when we talk about probiotics, we should start with the food sources. So there are supplements. I'm going to show you a reference to that in a minute. But, step one to nurturing a good, healthy microbiome with good, healthy bacteria and other elements could be to eat probiotic food. So that would include foods like yogurt with live active cultures. So if you heat or pasteurize a food, it kills the microbes. So when you look at a yogurt container, it will say as part of the ingredients includes live active cultures. So even though the yogurt is made with fermented with cultures, these live active cultures are actually added back to them after fermentation. And then there are also fermented foods like sauerkraut, kimchi. Another one that I did include on the slide is kombucha, simply because kombucha can vary from something really kind of whole foods made to sugary drinks with cultures added to them. So not all kombucha is created equal. One thing I can say about it is that real kombucha is not cheap. So if you were to buy a bottle of something that looked like kombucha, you would look for added sugars to try to limit any added sugars. And, there are in some cities, you can find places that are like breweries for kombucha. And you can actually see that those products are much more expensive than buying a soda like compound in a bottle. So as I mentioned before, the hype about probiotic supplements far exceeds the actual science here. So from my perspective, the more we learn about the microbiome and about probiotics, the more I realize how much we don't know. So you could go online and have see companies that will say, send us a stool sample and we'll tell you what kind of probiotics you should be taking, and they generally sell those probiotics. And I think it's important to know that that science has not evolved yet to the point where we can accurately make those recommendations. But there is some science. So if you're interested in a particular circumstance where you're wondering whether you should take a probiotic, one really good resource is this US Probiotic Guide. You can go online, and what they do is they gather together the existing research available on different kinds of conditions and different products, probiotic products. So for example, if you went in there and you were interested in, is there any research telling me that taking a particular probiotic might help me with bowel regularity? And you looked up one supplement called Align, ALIGN, they will tell you that they have some level 1 research to suggest it might be helpful. So when you look at the different products and the research evidence, it's helpful to know that level 1 is the highest level research. And then there's level 2 and 3, but it's also helpful to know, I think, that you could have one well-done study and that could be enough to qualify it as level 1. So even in the areas where it appears we're starting to gain some knowledge on particular health conditions and particular strains of probiotics, that doesn't mean that there's reams of research backing up lots of different findings, but this is definitely the best place to start. Another example would be sometimes people take antibiotics that can wipe out or greatly reduce their microbiome, and they may develop diarrhea, antibiotic-induced diarrhea. There is a probiotic product called Florastor that has level 1 research as potentially being effective for antibiotic-induced diarrhea. But I would definitely encourage folks to take with a grain of salt much of what you read online, because it tends to be a little overhyped. So, this is Dana-Farber. It's a cancer institute. What about the microbiome and cancer? And so this is, again, an area of a lot of interest, but there still needs to be a lot of work done in this area. What we know to this point is that few microbes directly contribute to cancer. So an example of one that would be HPV is a virus, direct relationship to cancer. But there are not a lot of particular strains of microbes directly related to cancer as cancer causing, but the microbiome may be involved in the growth of cancer cells due to the influence on the immune system. So as I mentioned before, about 70% of our immunity, we think, comes from our microbiome, from the GI tract. So there is a lot of evidence that will tie plant-based eating or high fiber diets to lower rates of some cancers, which we'll talk about. So it appears that there is this connection. But it's also interesting that there's some emerging research that suggests that the gut microbiome may influence the effectiveness of an immunotherapy, a chemotherapy, or radiation. But there's also, some research that suggests under some conditions you should not take probiotics. So there is some research on, I believe it's immunotherapies and melanoma, that people on those therapies for malignant melanoma should not take probiotics because it may have a negative effect on the treatment. So this falls into the same category as dietary supplements in general fall into. Just because some is good of a nutrient doesn't mean more is better. So we can't always assume that there's no harm associated with taking dietary supplements, and that would extend to the use of probiotics, certainly until we learn more. So we talked about eating probiotic food, and there may be some specific instances where a particular probiotic may be helpful. But what we all should be doing is eating more dietary fiber, because dietary fibers are the primary prebiotic for our probiotics. So these microbes, these probiotics that live mostly in our gut, so that it's weird as it sounds, we supposedly have 3 or 4 pounds of healthy microbes that coexist with us in our gut, and they eat dietary fibers. So prebiotics are largely dietary fibers. So if you looked in like a power bar, like a protein bar or something, and it says includes prebiotics, you may see things like chicory root or inulin. These are types of fibers. Far and away, we would love people to eat fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, legumes, whole grains, dietary sources of a variety of types of fibers. So these probiotics eat these prebiotics, these different types of fibers, and produce these compounds called postbiotics, which are the compounds that we think kind of go around the body and provide a lot of potential health benefits. So a healthy microbiome has been associated with a lower risk of pretty much every chronic disease that you can think of, from diabetes, cardiovascular disease, to cancer, to brain health. And often we don't think very much about dietary fiber potentially affecting our brain, but the more we learn about this, the more we realize really how fascinating and synergistic the influence of diet is on the entire body, including, now a greater understanding of the influence on our microbiome. So probably one of the earlier associations found between the microbiome and cancer is the connection between dietary fiber and colorectal cancer. So I remember first hearing about this ages ago. And so we initially assumed, and it could still be, there's some elements of this, that if there's something carcinogenic in the food supply and we eat more dietary fiber and we move our bowels more regularly, those potentially toxic compounds aren't sitting around a lot. So that still could be a potential influence. But now we understand that these microbes eat dietary fiber, and one of the postbiotics they produce are these compounds called short chain fatty acids that are protective of the cells that line the colon. And in fact, one meta-analysis of 25 different studies, so this is again a little while back because this is when these findings were first coming to light about short chain fatty acids and colorectal cancer. The study meta-analyses found that for every 10 grams of fiber in your diet, your colorectal cancer risk decreases by 10%. This is extremely important for us now because, as many people have heard, the incidence of colorectal cancer is starting to show up earlier in life, to the point where people are now encouraged to get colonoscopy starting at a younger age. I believe it's 45, but it may be younger in people who have a family history. So, the microbiome, there's some suggestion there may be elements of the microbiome that influenced how different folks responded to COVID. These are all the things that we're still trying to figure out. But, again, just eating more fiber, which is eating more plants, which is healthy for countless reasons, is the number one thing that somebody can do to nurture the microbiome. And there is actually a clinical trial going on right now testing whether giving patients a fiber-rich diet, high in fruits, vegetables, beans, nuts, and whole grains to nourish the microbiome may improve the odds that the cancer treatment they're taking is more effective. So this is going on at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, which I think is the biggest cancer treatment center in the country, I believe. But again, it's really important to know not enough is known at this point to prescribe specific probiotics for specific problems for the most part. But food sources are always going to be a win. So how do you nurture a healthy microbiome? Again, as I already mentioned, the bacteria in our gut ferment dietary fiber in the colon and produce short chain fatty acids and countless other elements that are good for health. And so when we eat a diet rich in a variety of dietary fibers, this supports microbial activity, diversity. So again, to go back to the kind of chicory root inulin thing, when we take these fibers and we put them in a otherwise pretty processed food, without the kind of synergistic elements of just whole grains, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, beans, in some concentrations, certain people may not respond well to that. And in fact, a friend of mine, Reese Wyman, who is a dietitian, he calls chicory root chicory toot because it can cause a lot of gas in many folks. So how much dietary fiber should we be eating? About 14 grams for every 1,000 calories consumed. So for your average 2,000 calorie diet, about 28 grams of protein. I think it's important to understand that the average American is eating about 14 or 15 grams of fiber. So the average American is eating about half the amount of dietary fiber than is recommended. Whenever someone is eating more dietary fiber, it's really important to stay hydrated. So on average, a couple of quarts a day of fluids. Anything that's liquid or would be if it melts counts towards that, around 2 quarts a day of some sort of fluid. This is particularly important for people that take fiber supplements for constipation or other issues. It's important to take seriously the information on the label that encourages you to drink a big glass of water with your fiber supplements. So again, as a rule, we don't encourage probiotic supplements unless we think there's a particular strain that's verified as safe and effective. So again, that's the other issue. We have to be reminded that dietary supplements are not regulated in the United States. So some supplement manufacturers, including probiotic manufacturers, may send their supplements to an outside lab to be verified. The most commonly used ones are USP and NSF. So these are outside labs where some supplement manufacturers will elect to send their products out for independent analysis. That means somebody not in the company is checking it for quality, purity, dissolvability, that the label, that it contains what the label says. Sometimes the wording on the label can be kind of confusing, and they'll say we have, kind of special clinical this, that, and the other. Doesn't necessarily mean that the analysis is independent. So like anyone who has seen a nutritionist at Dana-Farber, we recommend this balanced plate nutrition because it encourages a diet that is higher in plant-based foods. When we talk about plant-based eating, we're not talking about being a vegetarian or a vegan. People can elect to do that. But every health organization that has an infographic for plant-based eating basically has some version of this balanced plate. So this is the USDA Choose My Plate. This is the Healthy Eating Plate. The American Institute for Cancer Research has one called the New American Plate. And you can see that about 2/3 of the food choices are from fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, seeds, beans. And so whenever we can incorporate some plant sources of protein into our diet, that also increases fiber intake. But these balanced plate graphics are basically a Mediterranean diet on a plate. So this pyramid right here is a Mediterranean diet pyramid from Old Ways, which is an organization right here in Boston, that their mission is to promote traditional diets, such as the Mediterranean diet, but also the Asian heritage diet, African heritage diet, Latin American heritage diet. These are cultural ways of eating where there is more emphasis, as you can see on this pyramid, as opposed to the old USDA pyramid, which had starchy foods at the base, which we obviously realized was not a great idea. The foundation here are plant foods, and that also includes whole grains. So we want people to eat some whole grains. Their fibers are unique to them. It's not enough to just get your carbs from fruits and vegetables. People end up often over-restricting carbohydrates when they fully avoid grains. Fortunately, there are plenty of whole grains out there. I remember the day we used to have to go to a food co-op to buy them. Now you can get them at Stop and Shop. So again, variety, pairing your plant foods with seafood. There's more health benefits according to the Mediterranean diet, which is, again, the most researched plant-based eating pattern. More emphasis on seafood, then comes dairy and poultry, limiting red meat and added sugars. And these, this kind of just summarizes it up. So in our culture, our breakfast tends to look different than our lunch and dinner. So I think it's good to always have flexibility in your eating style. But these are considered templates for plant-based eating, which again will encourage more dietary fiber than the average person is likely eating. So at breakfast, some sort of a whole grain, some sort of a protein, some sort of a fruit or a vegetable. So it could be, old-fashioned or steel-cut oats with nuts or yogurt mixed in and berries. It could be a vegetable omelet with whole grain toast, or it could be, whole grain toast with peanut butter and a banana, or anything else you choose to eat at breakfast. There's no rules. The lunch and dinner plate, some sort of a healthy protein, again, including some plant sources like tofu, beans, nuts and seeds where you can. Some sort of a healthy carbohydrate, going for the whole grains to get those fibers. Beans are one of the highest fiber things you can eat. And then half the plate being vegetables or some sort of fruits. So just to summarize this, it's always going to be a good idea to eat probiotic foods like yogurt with live active cultures. Also, we could mention kefir, which is sort of like liquid yogurt. And then some of the like sauerkraut and kimchi. Certainly include those in your diet, but being serious about increasing fiber intake to nurture the growth of those microbes. As I always say, taking probiotics and not eating fiber is like buying a goldfish and never feeding it. Eventually, you're going to find it floating on the top of the water. So I think we lose track of the fiber message when it comes to the microbiome and gut health very frequently. All right, I'm just going to go back to the first slide. Oh, sorry, I did have one more. Just a reminder that snacks are opportunities to get more fiber in as well. So as a rule, we encourage people to think of a snack that will be nutritious and filling is one that pairs a protein with a plant food. So if you look here on the left, Greek yogurt, nut butters, nuts or seeds, cheese, cottage cheese, hummus, eggs, edamame, which are soybeans, any kind of beans, kidney beans, lentils, turkey breast, something from that category, a protein paired with raw or cooked vegetables, fresh fruit, frozen fruit, whole grain crackers, or breads. So if you're looking at breads, cereals, and crackers after the word ingredients, ideally you see the word whole in there, as in whole wheat, whole oat, whole multigrain is the main ingredient. It could be whole wheat tortillas or corn tortillas, are both considered whole grains. And, little kind of mini homemade bran muffins, they're all options. So I'm going to go back to the beginning here and answer some questions. So I can see, yeah, are there good alternatives to yogurt for someone who's lactose intolerant other than sauerkraut and kimchi? So lactose intolerance is really gray, as anybody who has it, maybe you experience this too. When it comes to yogurt, it's interesting because it appears that for some people, the presence of the live active cultures makes some people able to tolerate yogurt, but other people cannot. So it's not a good or a bad thing. It's either, what kind of lactose intolerance do you have, or how sensitive are you? I don't know much about the plant-based yogurts in terms of whether they contain live active cultures. So I'm thinking that's something to look into. You can take Lactaid pills or Dairy Ease pills prior to taking yogurt to see if that helps you tolerate it. So those are lactase enzyme pills that you would take, with the first bite of a yogurt and see if it helps you to tolerate it. That's where, again, like the kombucha, look around, talk to some people. I know I'd gone to in Portland, Maine, there's actually a kombuchery. It's a place where they actually ferment their own kombucha. And anyone who's had it, it almost tastes like fruit juice that's kind of gone over the edge. It's got this bubbliness, which is related to the fermentation. So you could consider a store-bought kombucha, but I'd probably go to a health food store and look for one that doesn't have a lot of added sugar. So I hope that gives you some ideas. You're welcome. You're very welcome. Does anyone else have any other questions? What if you truly follow all the nutritional guidelines put forth here, but still suffer from chronic bloating and constipation? Yeah, that people who have chronic bloating and constipation, I would recommend meet with a registered dietitian because that can be related to a number of things. For people that say are not on immunotherapies, which is where we wonder if there's a negative influence of taking probiotic supplements and response to therapy, at least in malignant melanoma. You could, as I mentioned before, try the Align. Some people, I've had people tell me that they eat Activia yogurt. I'm not 100% clear what makes the probiotic lines in Activia different from other probiotics, but I do have patients that have taken that and feel like it does help with bloating and constipation. The challenge is constipation and bloating can also be related to things like irritable bowel syndrome, for example, that may respond to a low FODMAP diet trial, which is separate from all of the things that we've been talking about today to some degree. So some of the things that have these FODMAPs in them that can aggravate irritable bowel syndrome are also sources of dietary fiber. But it's such a niche thing that having an appointment with a dietitian where you can really go through your history and explain what kinds of circumstances or any specific foods of note that you think make it better, make it worse. Sometimes people can take fiber supplements. I'm a particular fan of Benefiber, because Benefiber is 100% water soluble fiber, which means it completely dissolves in fibers when you mix it in with whatever you're drinking. So the use of something like Benefiber would be, a teaspoon 2 to 3 times a day, up to 2 teaspoons 3 times a day. So again, people have to sort of experiment and see what might help them. But what I like about the Benefiber is it's pretty innocuous. But for other people, Metamucil may be the answer. So that's about all I can say, aside from suggesting that you consider meeting with a dietitian to kind of talk through the specifics of your concerns. All righty.
All right, thank you so much, Hillary. And can you remind everyone how they can get in touch with the dietitian here or nutritionist here at Dana-Farber?
Sure. All of these schedulers in Dana-Farber Cancer Institute have access to the nutrition schedules. So oftentimes people will request referrals through their clinician, but you don't need to have a referral to meet with one of the nutritionists. So that would be my suggestion. Contact your clinician, say you'd like to meet with somebody from nutrition. They generally put in a referral and somebody will call you, or you can just call the schedulers and say, I'd like to meet with a nutritionist, and have them set you up.
Great. Thank you so much. As I said earlier, this video will be uploaded to our Blum YouTube playlist as well as our Blum Digital Resource Center, and you can catch up on all of our hot topics and nutrition videos on there as well. So thank you all again and have a great day.
Bye, everybody.